Welcome to episode 2 of my 6-day race with Yiannis Kouros. Episode 1 left off with me at a crossroads. I've always been an athlete, playing sports, much like Yiannis. He talks about playing sports when he was a child and using sports as an escape from the home. And I was kind of that way too. I grew up in apartment complexes, so I was out playing pickup games all the time, playing every sport imaginable. Not a lot of youth leagues back then. But by the time I moved around a lot, so sports was a great way to, I think I went to 4 or 5 elementary schools. My dad was in the Air Force, and then early in the computer business. But finally, in 76, we drove out here. I didn't fly forever. Drove out to California and ended up in Bakersfield, California with about 70,000 people. Small town. It's very much like being in Texas or Oklahoma. In fact, that's where a lot of people came from, the Dust Bowl. And then, of course, it's farm and agriculture and oil industry, hence the Texas people. Football's king. And I came in 8th grade, and being a small town, pretty much everybody's grown up with each other. And pretty much my only friends were kids who moved to town at the same time. So I was a big guy. I've always been big. And, I was like 5'10" in 8th grade, which I'm still 5'10". So I, went out for sports in junior high. So I got into high school. Of course, I played football, basketball, baseball my freshman year, and then football and basketball. Got cut by the basketball team my sophomore year, but I was out there playing baseball again, middle of April, almost 16 years old. Kouros is 7 years older than me, so he was born in 56, I guess, and I was born in 1963. But, I was on the baseball team the year before. That we lost every single game, and I sat on the bench the entire season. The coach never played anybody different. In fact, we'd be like, hey, I could lose too. So my sophomore year was kind of a turning point. I was like, these team sports, coaches don't believe in me. If I can't get out there and play, what's the point? And so by April, preseason in April, same coach. I was kind of, because then I moved up the frosh soft, kind of saw the writing on the wall. And I was thinking, I don't know if I'm going to stick this out. And then one day, I just broke out in hives at practice. And usually hives is an allergic reaction. Later on, I found out it could be a psychological type of thing too. Rolling around the grass. I've never liked grass, but I played basketball, football, all those sports. Spent lots of time rolling around the dirt and the grass. Hives all over my body. Really kind of crazy. Remember going to the doctor, which was a big thing in my family. Never went to the doctor. And, I think they gave me a shot and they calmed down. And after that, I started thinking, wow, this baseball is just I'm not enjoying myself. And so I just walked off the team one day, headed over to track. Reason I started track was, I liked running. I hadn't really done a whole lot, but I looked at the two sports where you didn't have to worry about who the coach was or who you were, and it was basically swimming and running. I went to Highland. At the time, it was a rich kid school, so a lot of kids were good swimmers. They've been swimming since they were little kids. Even though I've been swimming since I was a little kid, it was always in pools at apartment complexes, not in pools at country clubs. So I figured I could make the swim team. But running was pretty fair. Didn't cost any money because never had any money. Kind of like similar to Kouros talks about kind of growing up fairly poor, and sports is a way to get out of the house. And so, like him, I started running when I was 16 years old. Quit the baseball team, walked over to the track team, joined the team. By the end of the season, broke 5 minutes for the mile, and I was hooked. Reading about Kouros, kind of the same thing. Of course, he was a much better runner in high school. There in Greece was very, of course, they don't have as big as countries. I was here in California, and California is pretty big time. Southern California state meet's like a national meet. But when I was my junior year, after less than a year running, I just dove into the whole sport. Got my hands on every book and magazine I could find. Yes, books and magazines, because there was no Google, there was no internet. So you'd have to order a book, and I read about all the great marathoners, the Finns, Lassi Viren, Paavo Nurmi, just everybody and anything I get my hands on. Even started reading about the great 1870s and 1880s, the multi-day races, and was just fascinated by it all. Learned about ultras. Thankfully, Bakersfield, even though it was a small town, back then with 70,000 people, we had 20, 30 guys breaking 3 hours in the marathon. They're all in their 30s and 40s. I thought I was old man, kind of funny now that I'm 57. But so I researched that, and now we have maybe 400,000 people and maybe half a dozen people breaking 3 hours. Definitely different nowadays. And I joined those guys, and so I jumped into a marathon. Bakersfield had a marathon every year. It was like a 13-mile loop out on the southwest side of town. and I trained pretty hard for it. And so my junior year, after running for a year, I jumped in the marathon, having a great race, did the typical thing, about 20 miles, blew up. But I didn't blow up from fatigue and stuff. What I ended up getting was waterlogged. I didn't really drink when I trained, but back then, of course, races, they'd like drink, and I just drank too much, had some stomach issues, and ended up running 3:01. Pretty upsetting. But long story is that by the time I got out of high school, I broke 3 hours to 2:55. Then I ran in college at UC San Diego. It appears that Kouros just basically left home and was on his own, and he didn't go to college, I don't think. But then when he was 21, he ran his first marathon in like 2:43. I eventually got my time down at 2:50 at about the same age, 2021, like 1982. And then in that year, I also ran my first ultra, 50K, Oceanside, La Jolla, run along the coast, pretty hilly, beautiful race. I remember running pretty quick, running like 3:40 something, winning a free pair of shoes, was the fastest youngster in the race. Really enjoyed it. And I guess that's kind of about the same time that Kouros ran his first. He ran his best marathon was 2:25. Pretty damn spitty. I remember when I was in college, I had a bunch of guys we trained with, and they were all trying to break 2:30. And you get under 2:30, you're pretty fast. So Kouros, he was training, running marathons, and then he just decided to do the Spartathlon, which is a brand new race, 156 miles. So he went from 26 miles to 156 miles. Of course, Kouros in that first Spartathlon, he won it. He was like 21 hours, something like that. He came in so fast that people didn't even realize he was there yet. People accused him of cheating. Dan Brennan, who I got to meet, who won, he did didn't win, but did the Grand Slam like 9 times. He said, usually you don't want to be accused of cheater, but in his case, it was the ultimate compliment because people just could not believe the performances he had. And in fact, he ended up doing, I think, 4 Spartathlons and has the 4 fastest times on that course. So then, my career, I went wandering into the triathlon world, kept getting bigger and bigger, had a record store, had kids. Kouros, of course, in the 80s and 90s were setting all kinds of records, and I always followed him. I wasn't really racing much, but I was, because I was busy. I had record stores, I had 3 sons, all these kind of things. But then in 2011, I kind of decided to expand my horizons. I was mainly a walker. I still am a walker, and I decided I wanted to try and do a 50-mile race, and I ended up finding one local one, a trail race here. But the problem with the trail races was, they had these like 13-hour cutoffs, which, running's kind of doable. Walking, it's really hard to do 13 hours, and so I ended up having to do a little bit more running. Of course, by this time, by 2011, I'd already had my Bakersfield Distance Project for a couple of years where I was coaching runners here locally and online, and so I had a lot of support and help with them. And I ended up finishing at Leona in like 12:45, and that was the beginning of my ultra career. I only ran, like I said, one before in like 1982. Then I took quite a bit of time off, till 2011, and then I just started doing trail races because I didn't really understand or notice that there were other races out there. I mean, yeah, there were. It was interesting that here in Bakersfield in the 80s, we had a lot of guys doing Ironmans and marathons and even ultras. We had Eddie Lujan and Bob Moses and Chet Blanton and another friend and they were doing Western States, and Chet actually did 6 days back in the 80s. And then a friend of mine, Leo Marquez, was a really good 24-hour guy. He was doing over 140 miles on a track, which I remember when I heard that when I was a kid, 18, 19, thinking that was just crazy. So I tried my hand at trails, did a couple 100-mile trail races like San Diego and Angeles Crest, and I always kept timing out at 50 miles or 75 miles. One of the big issues I always had with these races was like Angeles Crest, you get 33 hours, you get 23 miles an hour, but you'd have to be at like mile 50 at like 16-minute pace, where the average pace for the whole race was 20, and it just got really frustrating. My last trail 100 I tried, I was running really well. San Diego, I made the 50-mile cutoff by 10 or 15 minutes because you had to be there in like 16, 17-minute pace. Ran throughout the whole night, got to mile 75 at dawn, and I thought the cutoff was 5:30 in the morning, at like 17:30 pace or something like that. Turned out the cutoff was 5, and I missed the cutoff by 10 minutes. And by then, I was pretty much frustrated and thinking, well, that's just not going to happen for me. I'm not doing these trail races. Meanwhile, I had done it in 2011 because I'd kind of told myself I was never going to run a 100-mile race until I could do the Western States qualifying. I think you used to have to do 100 miles in not 100, like 50 miles in like 11 hours just to qualify for the lottery. But I was in such great shape after my 2011 season that I found this race endurance challenge, kind of like Kouros, running across towns and roads and stuff. It was the endurance challenge from Corona. It was kind of riverside. You'd run along a bike path for 30 miles, hit Huntington Beach, run up the coast, Huntington Beach, Long Beach, and then through Palos Verdes, and then Manhattan Beach, and finish up the Santa Monica Pier. And that was my first 100, and I did 28:22, and I was kind of really enjoyed doing that. And I had a lot of support with my Bakersfield Distance Project people. And so after I did those, and after I decided to quit doing trail races, that's when I went and looked around for some timed events. And my first timed event was in 2013, Beyond Limits, a 24-hour race up in the mountains in above Palm Springs. And on the next episode, we'll talk about that.